Greetings, travelers, and welcome back to another episode of VG Art Review. This week we'll be taking a look at Dear Esther and Secrets of Raetikon. I'm going to be sticking to 2 games as opposed to the usual 3 that I have been doing. I find that I can spend more time on 2 and give it a more fair critique if I don't have to have that extra third one in there. So that's what we'll be doing from here on out.
Dear Esther, I met Paul.
We will begin with Dear Esther. For the sake of simplicity and prevent confusion, I'm going to refer to Dear Esther as a game. While it's described as a game, it's really more of a non-game. More accurately, I would describe it as an interactive story, as the basic elements that make up even the idea of a game are not present here. As a story, it reads more like poetry than prose, with heavy symbolism and metaphors. I think if you enter into Dear Esther with this in mind, you'll have an easier time accepting it for what it really is, eye candy with a narrative. The story is told in the form of a letter written by a man addressed to someone named Esther, hence the title Dear Esther. He outlines his struggles with loss and sickness and then acceptance, all the while discussing various historical bits of the island you find yourself exploring. The writing and voice acting are something that could be discussed entirely on their own, but will not be covered here in this installment, except in how it relates to the visual aspects. When Dear Esther first came out, I remember a decent amount of chatter around the game with its praise of high visuals and being described as an experience above all else. Dear Esther was released in early 2012, so I kept in mind that technology wasn't much different than it was available now. When I initially stepped into the first scene, I was pleasantly surprised by the amount of thought and detail put into everything. It all felt very natural and not at all randomly generated. It was some place that I could actually see existing. Unfortunately, the feeling didn't last very long as I took in the texture details. For a game with next to no mechanics beyond walking, I had hoped for that a little higher fidelity. Putting my nose to a wall became immediately blurry and smudged, and foliage used that trick of putting a flat plane that always faces the camera, so standing immediately above a plant would cause it to look extremely flat and kind of break the immersion. Also, surfaces kind of lacked any kind of what is called bump mapping. It's a trick in texturing used to give the impression of an irregular texture without actually having to model the details. For a game with static lighting in almost all scenes, this could have been a very effective way to add visual value. The only reason I could work out for the reasoning behind these shortcomings is one of 3 possible cases. First, the most likely scenario is that it was being created by a small team where resources were limited, primarily that of man-hours. Second, being a desire to run cleanly on all systems, but this just felt like an excuse for a lazy attitude. Lastly is the fact that originally it was a mod for Half-Life 2, which itself was an old engine, and this standalone version is forced to work off of these limitations. Now let's rewind and take a step back for a second. Having said all this, I want to say that after a while I was actually able to get past all these pitfalls and enjoy the game. I must emphasize that if you decide to play this game for yourself, give it at least an hour. If you're not still enthralled by that point, then you have my permission to discontinue. The magic of the visuals really began about the time you enter the caves. This is also at the point at which the story begins to piece itself together, while at the same time becoming even more abstract. The story suggests you are following along the footsteps of the letter writer, who is slowly going insane due to the presumed syphilis that racks his body. Paintings line the caves, painted with a mix of local bioluminescent moss and buckets of paint seen in the shed at the beginning. The drawing appears to be a mix of electrical diagrams as well as diagrams of chemical chains and biological cells. There is very little intentional flow to the path you take, while giving you a little bit of freedom in how you explore. You start on the beach, a place of quiet contemplation and reflection. There is a radio tower in the background lazily blinking away, foreshadowing things to come. Then you begin to move a little deeper into the island, while the story builds into detail, talking about very simple things. As you enter the island, his descriptions enter the flowery side, and you can almost feel that as the scene becomes more alien with the glowing moss and paintings, that the writer is slowly losing his mind. The bright colors contrast strongly with the dark caves. You can amuse yourself for a few moments by trying to decode the words and diagrams as if there was even a slight chance of doing so. The 2 questions I ask myself anytime I critique something are, what is its purpose, and was it effective? If I'm unable to find the purpose, then I will play more on the lenient side and come back to it later. If after coming back to it, I'm still unable to decipher a purpose, I have to answer the second question of its effectiveness as no, it's not. So, what is the purpose of Dear Esther? I would boil it down to telling a story via the interactive medium of video games sans any traditional game mechanics. Now, was it effective? I can't say with a solid yes that it was. It was by all means interesting enough to hold my attention, and by some standards that would classify it as a yes, but I wasn't left thinking that it couldn't have been done better, such as my issues with the low textures. If you're distilling your game down to a narrative with graphics, you better have a darn good story and amazing graphics. While the voice acting was admirable, the visuals didn't have the needed polish. Dear Esther is something you'll have to make your own judgment on. Some may simply place an emphasis on different elements, and you may have a different takeaway. I'll leave it up to you to make your own final verdict. Next up, we have Secrets of Raetikon. Secrets of Raetikon is a game of exploration with minor puzzle and complete the monument-like elements. The game is devoid of any story, and it seems to leave it to you to create your own narrative. You play the role of an avian creature of some indistinguishable species. Control elements are introduced one by one to quickly accommodate you with the game, but are given organically so that they may be easily skipped for those who are playing through a second time or are already acquainted with the controls. The only clear goal presented is that of the monument. Throughout the open world, there are 7 statues into which you can feed your golden triangles that you have been collecting. Give the statue enough triangles and you are given a pyramid object which you need to return to the monument. You're not alone in this world and must deal with various hazards including thistle plants as well as other potentially hostile wildlife. The overall style takes on a clear cubist influence for the most part, with other minor elements such as foliage having a more cel-shaded look. If you remember Kami from a previous episode, I was a little down on the effectiveness of its style. When I saw this game, I immediately thought this is how I would have wanted Kami to look. The sharp contrast and geometric designs would have been perfect. Of course, we're talking about Secrets of Raetikon here. While Kami's subject had the clear Japanese origin, Secrets of Raetikon is a bit nebulous. The game's description describes this area as being the mountainous region in Europe known as the Alps. This would suggest that it might implement some Swiss influences, but the sharp corners and rectilinear geometry seem counter to the symmetric curves I would expect. Not knowing the region this supposedly takes place in, I would actually say it has more of a Native American feel, or perhaps even a Scandinavian, if to a lesser extent. Style varies a little between scenes. A dense forest will have its darker greens, and a high mountain pass will take on duller neutrals and grays, but the style is very consistent. This creates a good unity, but at the same time can create a visual monotony if not varied enough. In this case, I think it could have afforded a little more variety. At times I became lost due to scenery all looking the same and being unable to find my way back to the monument. Exploration is a large part of Raetikon, but it means to bypass areas I've been through 5 times probably would have been nice. Secrets of Raetikon has a unique style that is quite nice to look at and works on any level of processing power, but I'm finding it difficult to say much else about it. I hate to call a game eye candy because it diminishes the other mechanics of a game and suggests that its main purpose was just to be visually appealing. Unfortunately, to a certain extent, this game has kind of backed itself into that corner. The style does not serve any purpose beyond that of aesthetics and has no impact on the gameplay at all. Perhaps with greater variety and playing to the strengths of the style, it could have had a more effective hold on me. I would like to see a sequel to Secrets of Raetikon, along the same vein but perhaps with more progression to keep it interesting, as well as having more interaction between the visual and mechanical side. This has been another episode of VG Art Review. If there's something else you'd like to see me take a look at, let me know in the comments. Be sure to check out our other series as well. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give a like and subscribe. Lets us know we're doing something right and lets you know when the next episode comes out. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.